Man, I got to tell you, Tim and I have both just woken up. Except for Tim, it's morning, and for me, it's from a nap. It is 11:42 on Wednesday evening. Tim, it's, I believe, 7:42 where you are in Bahrain. You've just spent an entire day at the track, which, by the way, is most people's dream on most weekends anyway. But this one, you're actually watching real cars go around a real track. Formula One 2024 is real, and I think everybody wants to know, like, what were your takeaways? What did we see out there?
So day one just ended, and it was pretty cool, Adam. I mean, I got to go trackside, which was pretty awesome. Not a lot of people, get to do that in their lifetime. So it was really cool, man. Like, yeah. I sent you some pictures, but like I was like, this far away from like, a Red Bull coming straight at me. I was in pit lane and got to watch pit stops and stuff, but there is nothing really holding you back. So you can really get in front of the teams. And I think I kind of jumped out of the way of George Russell at one point when he was coming in for a pit stop because I didn't think he was going to be able to slow the car down in time. So that was interesting.
They slow down quickly.
No, man, the unbelievable, Adam. Like, I've been trackside before many times, but this one was really close because in testing, there's not a ton of restrictions like there is during a race weekend. But from first glimpses at everything, and it was just day one, and it is just testing. But man, the RB20 looks incredible. It looks amazing.
Yeah. Man. I mean, so it did set the fastest time today. And I think everybody's like, okay, great. What do I have to look forward to? But what I thought was interesting, and I'm just pulling this up from my Twitter account because I did tweet it here, was that when you look at the final times throughout the testing today, as much as it's testing and as much as everybody's like, take it with a grain of salt, here's what I see, okay? I see Oracle Red Bull Racing. I see McLaren F1. I see Scuderia Ferrari. I see Visa Cash App RB F1 team. I see BWT Alpine F1 team. And I see Aston Martin. Those are 6 different teams at the top 6 in terms of time. And the drivers, obviously Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly, and Lance Stroll. And again, like, listen, we get it. It's preseason testing. They're trying a bunch of things. Max did an insane amount of laps, 172 laps or whatever he did. That's a crazy amount on the body, but you can tell he's trying to get conditioned. I think that's pretty good for the sport, don't you?
Yeah, for sure, man. Like, I think a couple things. Watching some of the performance runs because we didn't really get to see like push quality laps on the soft compound tire. We didn't really get to see those performance runs. We were watching a lot of, medium tire push laps, cars fat with fuel. I would say the 2 cars that stood out to me the most, obviously, was RB20, but also McLaren. And that when Lando Norris was driving in the evening session. So in the evening session, it's kind of like when the track is the grippiest and it's the fastest at that point. And Lando looked really solid. Like that car looked really, really good. And I know they had a little bit of trouble with the floor and underneath the car in the PM session when Lando was trying to get going. So he missed some track time at the beginning of his day one session. But as he kept going, I mean, the car looks on rails. It's able to do a few different things that a couple of the other cars just can't do. And that, again, that's just, from trackside, which is actually, you learn a lot and you see a lot. But the other car that really impressed me was AMR 24. So the Aston Martin, when Lance was out in it in the evening, that car, I don't think it's anywhere near its potential just yet. And I think the team itself, they were very happy with how their entire day went. The other one, like you said, the V-Carb is interesting to see them that high up, but Daniel Ricciardo did. It was funny, Adam. I was part of the session when I was standing there watching. It was was really, really cool to see, Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo, because they were just going back and forth on the track. So it was like really impressive.
Well, I'll be honest, Tim. I think the thing that I was, as a McLaren fan, as a completely biased McLaren fan, the thing I was worried about the most was, whether or not the upgrades that we saw last year were a mirage or whether they were the real thing, right? Because, I still have a little bit of PTSD from them starting last year and finishing in the first 4 or 5 Grand Prix right at the back, like being worse than Haas, really, really bad, worse than AlphaTauri was last year. So it looks like, Oscar put in some good times, Lando put in some good times. You feel like there's some good grip. It's good in the straight line. It's good on a corner. Like what are you seeing from that car specifically? And I'm just selfishly asking you because I love them.
It looked good all over, Adam. I would say it looked good in slow speed. It looked good on corner exit from slow speed, which is one of their issues from last season. And I would say they've definitely made an improvement there. And then high speed as well. They look really strong. I just think it's a solid package they've got it by the looks of it. Now again, they have more upgrades coming. And that car may look a little bit different when the race one starts, but for now, they look solid, Adam. They do look really good.
What about Racing Bulls? I refuse to call them V-Carb right now. I want to call them Racing Bulls. I think it's a cooler name. What's the deal? Yuki looked like he put in some fast times this morning. Daniel, or I guess yesterday for you. Daniel, obviously you said you were going head-to-head with Lando. The car, from some reports that I'm reading, is surprising people. Is that the team that we got to kind of watch this year?
Yeah, I do. I think we do for sure. They've definitely made a step. Now, again, we talked about this on the podcast before, like how much of that, IP is theirs, how much of it is coming from Red Bull. And we haven't heard from Zach Brown yet. Really looking forward to what he has to say about that whole thing, because those were the two cars that were actually really going at it on track on day one. And I'm curious to hear his thoughts. But at the same time, when you look at the V-Carb, it again looks really solid in the high speed stuff. The low speed stuff is a little iffy, but the high speed stuff, they looked really good. And Daniel Ricciardo looks incredible. Like, he's the fittest he's looked, and at the same time, I would say he's driving as best I've seen him. Like, he looked really smooth on day one, Adam. He looked really strong. And again, this is a team that's gone through some changes, right? Changes off track in particular. And they've got a new team principal now in Laura Mekis, and that has to be a whole new program that they've got to set up there. So I am fascinated to see how these next few days play out for that team.
Well, it seems like, a lot of people had written Daniel Ricciardo off as he just doesn't have it anymore. And it's interesting the role that confidence can play. We talk about it. I hate to bring too much hockey into this because it's sort of what I'm known for with Steve and Jesse on the network, and people watching this may not watch hockey, but the Leafs had a goaltender too who got them to the second round this past spring, and this year went through some sort of loss of confidence. We're still not exactly sure what happened, and was almost unplayable for like a month or two. And what we kept saying at the time was he didn't just forget how to be a really good goaltender. That didn't happen. Like, he didn't just lose all that skill. It's all between the ears. And, so it's great to see Daniel Ricciardo confident, because after, the last year at Renault was better than I think people give it credit for. And actually, I think the first year at Renault was better than people give it credit for. It just wasn't what Red Bull was doing. And then those two pretty disastrous years at McLaren, I think that people forgot that this guy was a pretty spectacular driver who a lot of people pegged to win a world championship at some point in his career.
Yeah, 100%. And it's good to see him back. It's good to see him back up to form, I would say. And I think just the car in general, it just really does look like it suits what he likes to do. He likes a pointy front end, something similar to what Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, those guys like. And I think if the car characteristics are similar to, say, the RB19 or the RB20 in a way, then I think like, Daniel could be in for like a really great season, Adam, like really great.
That would be exciting. I'd love to see that. I think the F1 world would be healing if he has a good year. Did anybody show up unprepared, do you think? Like, I always think about that scene in Drive to Survive where Claire Williams is like staring daggers through her team principal because as they, haul pieces from the factory over, in commercial air flights to the track. Did anybody look to you like, oh boy, this is going to be a rough year?
I would say, Williams did, it was a pretty rough day for Williams on day one. And again, same thing with Williams. They showed up to the track, late in terms of their full car concept. Like, we didn't really see what that car actually looked like until they had a filming session the day before testing, so Tuesday. And so they were still putting that car together. And so for some of these other teams, like, they've had a full car put together for quite a few days before that. For them, it was a rough go. They had a fuel leak. Alex Albon had a fuel leak in his AM session, and then Logan Sargent had a massive spin down towards turn 9, turn 10, in the afternoon, and that was from a drive shaft breakage. Now, how it got broke, I think it's probably because of the bumps that are in that section that snapped it in half, but that's why he had his incident. But that ended their day. They barely got any running in, and that's not great for day one. That's kind of one of those things where you want to run as much as you can in the first few days so you know where your reliability stands, and then when you get to day 3, that's kind of when you start really pumping in the performances and seeing where you're at on that end of the spectrum. And then on the flip side of that, I would say Haas, that was a bit of a struggle for them. Again, new team principal, Ayo Komatsu, and he's got his hands full there. Again, that operation, we've been through it on this podcast, what they have to go through. And I think it's going to be a tough start to the season for them as well. But for their program, they're just focused on trying to figure out how to get this car in a better window for races.
Oh man, I read some of Ayo Komatsu's quotes even leading up to this, like him fully admitting car is not going to have a lot of performance, and I just wonder at some point somebody's going to have to be honest about the investment level. But we'll leave that for another show. I don't want to go deep on that. What surprised me, I think, about the Williams conversation is, with James Vowles there and the performances they had last year, finishing higher than I think they have in the last half decade, I thought the days of unpreparedness at Williams were over. And it could be because they're trying to do too much too soon. It could be because their factory and their equipment are old, which we know, and that they are going to get more and more investments as they get better. But, we're still not quite there yet. What was it today? What do you think?
It's a great point that you make, like trying to do too much too fast. And I think that's exactly what it is. It's a team that's really trying to turn around their entire program. They're trying to turn around their entire car concept. And you can't really do that in a year. It takes like years to get to that point where you can really make an aggressive change like Mercedes did and really have it be successful and be competitive on that front. And for Williams, they've totally thrown away what has worked best for them in the past. But again, with that older car, very unpredictable for the drivers. So it's not filling you with confidence when you go to push it. Now they have a more stable platform, which is a step in the right direction. But again, Adam, like as a team, you've taken, one big step backwards to try and go in another direction, 2 steps forward. So it makes it very challenging for the team to have to see it go back before it can go forward again. And that's exactly the spot that team is in.
Well, it's going to be an interesting day for you. And I know testing gets underway in a couple of hours, right around 2 a.m. My time. I will be back to sleep at that point, I hope. But Tim, one of the things that we wanted to talk about, we got a really cool sneak peek at Drive to Survive. And we feel very fortunate that Netflix, gave us some advanced copies on that. But, the way they handled the show this year, and I think if you're a hardcore Formula One fan, there has been backlash to this show because it's like, oh, I brought in a whole bunch of new people who don't know anything about the sport. But that's why it's been great, right? Then the other criticism was, oh, they've made up fake rivalries. And what struck me after watching the episodes is despite there being an absolutely historic, never seen before dominant season from one team, you see a little bit of Red Bull and Christian Horner at the beginning and nothing from Max and nothing from Sergio the rest of the way. That struck me the most, is the absence of those guys. And I know it was a conscious choice by the team and specifically by Max. I wonder, Tim, if they haven't made a huge mistake, because the series is really fantastic this year and we'll get into some of the details of it. But I just felt like I want to get your opinion on it, because it does feel like they missed an opportunity. This is a well-produced, amazing series that could have changed, shifted, probably warmed up Max Verstappen's PR, and instead it kind of comes across like he's missing the party.
Yeah, it really did seem like they weren't the main focus of really much anything in this entire season of Drive to Survive. But like I'm curious to know, because I don't really have this answer, but I'm curious to know if the team just didn't allow Netflix to have as much access with Red Bull as they used to in the past, and whether or not Max wanted to, really participate. I mean, on one front, like, drivers do like their personal life to be their personal life. Like, we don't really get to see much of Fernando Alonso, even though there is a bit of an episode that's sort of dedicated to him as well. And so I think, like, on that front, I just think it's just they're just trying to like keep Netflix at bay a bit so they can just focus on trying to win championships. Which,
I mean, it makes sense. They're winning. They've got a fast car. It's crazy. I think, fairly or unfairly, Max Verstappen has been, as most winners are, cast as a bit of a villain. I think Lewis Hamilton was. I think Sebastian Vettel definitely was. Schumacher was, to non-Schumacher fans. So it's not like this is unheard of in this sport. But I think it really struck me. I was like, man, this is a historic year. But there was so much other drama off of the track, and there's a few episodes that I want to point out directly. Like, I think the first one that really hit me was the breakdown of what happened. I think it's a two-parter with Alpine and Otmar Safnauer. And what's interesting about that to me, Tim, is it was actually Christian Horner's reaction to it when he's talking to the new Alpine boss in the hallway. He's like, "Oh, you're the new guy," and he's like, "Nice to meet you." And then he just kind of awkwardly stands there. And then they cut to an interview of him, and he's like, they're a bit of a strange animal.
Yeah, and I think like it's. Oh, you're frozen. I think I got you back. Oh, I got you.
Am I?
You? I lost you.
Okay, good.
There we go. Got you.
You got me? No? Great. Okay, sorry.
Where did you leave off?
I was talking about Otmar and Alpine and Christian Horner saying they're a bit of a strange, Alpine, Renault are a bit of a strange animal.
Okay. They definitely are. I mean, I think when we kind of look at how that team is put together, and, it's something we've talked about. You have a team that's located in France building engines, and then you've got another team that's located in the UK building a race car. And so trying to marry those two things together, very difficult thing to do. And so when you look at it, it's kind of like you don't have everything under one roof, which is what you really want for a Formula One team. You want to try and have everything under one roof now to make things way more easier and streamlined. But, I think for the team and for Otmar, I think he was really put in a difficult position, Adam, like just trying to run that team and essentially be the fall guy.
Well, yeah, and he'd been there. I mean, over the course of his tenure, if you just look at it from the outside, You'd see that he lost Fernando Alonso. You'd see that he lost Oscar Piastri. Now, Pierre Gasly is no slouch, but he's not Fernando Alonso. And then they don't have that amazing third driver who is now kicking their butts over at McLaren, right? So that doesn't look good. And then they started last year and they had the double collision, I think, in Australia, and they had two DNFs in a row, double DNFs in a row, brutal. But when you go behind the scenes, was it not the Renault Alpine board that said, well, we can't offer Fernando a 2-year deal? And I do believe that the Oscar Piastri contract was signed before Otmar got there, and Alpine's head of legal, and this is crazy because I looked this up on on LinkedIn, Tim, when it happened. Their head of legal was removed a couple of months after Piastri signed with McLaren. Not kidding. I kept an eye on it. I was like, that's something that their legal person should know. And I noticed the job change, and that wasn't really widely reported, but she was taken out. So, or at least she was moved on, or she resigned, or whatever you want to call it. She's not there anymore. And I feel like it wasn't enough time for that to be his fault. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think when I say, fall guy, that's one of the things that I bring up, a lot is that Fernando Alonso contract renewal with Alpine, and the power struggle behind the scenes of trying to kind of get Fernando re-signed with Alpine. And I think Otmar has given instruction, to maybe only give Fernando 1 year because Laurent Mekies may not believe that he's good enough for another year. Maybe when he gets a little older, he's going to slow down. And I think that was the fear from Laurent Rossi. I called him Laurent Mekies. Laurent Rossi from behind the scenes. And
that's right, Laurent Rossi.
I think like that's a huge, huge part of all this. And I think like when we look at the episode, they do a good job of kind of like showing sort of the downfall of the team, but at the same time, there are other reasons as to why, Otmar, got let go. And one of the reasons is that Renault and Alpine, they wanted to have this team being more competitive sooner and faster, streamlined, faster. And you can't do it when you've got two separate factories. And I think that was one of the things for Otmar. It was trying to convince them that, hey, we need to put everything under one roof. And this is going to take a long time because we're so separated.
Has that been worked on since? Like, are they moving towards moving them all to Enstone or moving them all to France?
No. Nothing.
Really?
Not. Yeah. Like they haven't.
Okay. All right.
They haven't. It's not really like. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. You know what these teams, man. Like it's always a challenge to try and help a team help themselves. And sometimes when you have big owners, like a big ownership group like Renault is, you tend, Adam, to have too many cooks in the kitchen. Well,
one team that I think can be accused of just that, huge brand, probably the world's most recognizable car brand, that's Ferrari. The conversation in the whole episode around Fred Vasseur taking over and the rivalry and the danger that Leclerc and Sainz put themselves in. I'd almost forgotten Monza last year, how eventful it was and how disappointing it was when Red Bull pulled ahead with just a few laps to go. Like, it was like, how could you not get excited or romantic about a Ferrari win at Monza? Like and we had the McLaren win at Monza a couple years ago. It seems to be a track where special things happen. But Carlos specifically, watching him go out and win the Singapore Grand Prix after that in the series and what that meant for the team and him and Charles coming together, it's just interesting now viewing it through the lens of he's being replaced by Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah. Episode 6, leap of faith. Oh yeah, for sure. I loved that episode. I loved it. That was my favorite episode in this entire season. I loved how they filmed the locals. I love how they went to coffee shops and they basically just got audio of people
Yes.
being like, yes, Ferrari. And the other people saying like, F Ferrari. Like, what are we doing? We're bringing in a guy from France
Or
to run our
who's
team.
this Fred Vasseur? Yeah.
It was that was my favorite episode. They did a great job with it. It for me, best episode of the season. And I think for basically, if you're going to tell sort of that true sort of storyline and story arc of a team throughout a season, that's that episode. And they nailed it on all points, right? Like if we go back and we talk about the 2 Alpine episodes, it was like, well, I mean, there are a couple things they kind of did leave out, but for this particular episode with Ferrari, they really captured the true thing from start to finish, and they did a great job, and it shows.
It does. And it's interesting the way they handled this season. And they've handled a lot of seasons like this. When it started, it was a lot more of a narrative storyline of like 3 teams, right? You had Haas, you had Red Bull, and those were sort of the 2 big ones in the first season. Gunther Steiner's coming out party and Daniel Ricciardo's big decision. That was season 1, right? That was the really big sort of crux of the whole thing. And they followed that and followed that and followed that. As the show's gotten bigger and it's had to incorporate all the teams to varying degrees, Sauber's never involved. They never take part. Like Bottas and Joe Granu are not in this very much. But I think it's interesting looking at the way they handled this year, because there were defined storylines outside of Max Verstappen. So maybe it's a good thing that Max is, they want to focus on championships, because you had the McLaren storyline where they're starting at the back, and then everybody knows what happened. They got better and better and better, and they were regularly on podiums by the end of the year. And having Claire Williams come in and talk about just how rare that is. Like, you show up and your car is bad, and you almost feel like, oh my God, I'm gonna be stuck in purgatory for the rest of the year. And Zach Brown having to deal with the sponsors and getting that on camera.
Yeah,
the guy who heads up Google's marketing division going, you better give us some better results, man. The pressure that you feel for Zach in that moment, it's like, wow. And I love the way, so they kind of chop it up and handle it. I also want to say this, viewing the Lewis Hamilton Mercedes story through a lens of, we know that Lewis ended up at Ferrari, and his relationship with Toto and everything that's gone on there. What an episode that was, like, actually gripping.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it was really good. And it didn't seem staged when they did some of their sit down and chats. I mean, I think though the only thing that really seemed staged in like the Mercedes episode in particular, the only thing for me that felt like it was really staged was when Toto and Lewis were sitting down in where were they? So they were sitting down in
his
Toto's office, in a motorhome. And that episode 6, that was leap of faith. I think I screwed up the Ferrari episode. I think it was what was a Ferrari episode? Forza Ferrari episode 8. So my bad, everybody who's listening.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Episode 6. Episode 6 was the Hamilton one, and I really enjoyed it. I liked it. I liked the behind the scenes stuff. I liked when George and he were driving around the Mercedes Project 1 car, and the film crew telling Lewis to kind of come back. Like, we need to get you ready for this shoot.
That was great.
And Lewis like wanting to like get going, like, come on guys, this is taking way too long. Like, I've got a lot of stuff to do. So I think like in that aspect, like it gave us a good glimpse into like, what these guys are like, what that team dynamic is like, what that relationship between George and Lewis is like. But I would say, Adam, like to go back to McLaren, episode 3, I believe it was called Under Pressure. That was one of my favorite episodes as well. And like you said, when Zach's sort of sitting down and talking with like the folks from Google and some of the other sponsors that he had at that table, like that was a real conversation. Like they actually mic'd them all up, and and they, obviously they removed some things that they really didn't want us to see, but for the most part, like that was like a real sit down chat conversation, meet and greet dinner sort of thing going on there, and there were real conversations happening there, and it was great, man. I really liked that episode. I liked how they did a great job of showing that relationship between Zach Brown and Lando Norris. And I think one of the most important things that, this team, or Netflix, I should say, did, or Box to Box Films, was string together the entire season of relationships. Every episode was a relationship to each other in some form or fashion. I mean, there were a couple episodes that were just not very good, but there were some really great stuff because of that relationship sort of focus. And I thought like they did a great job of nailing that because, behind the scenes, a big part of Formula One, Adam, is relationships.
Oh, yeah, any business. But I mean, Formula One that's all they do is talk. The walls talk in Formula One. That's why there's so many rumors floating around.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And that's why I really like that episode as well. And I don't know. I don't even know what your favorite episodes are. Like I haven't even asked you yet.
Obviously, the McLaren one was great. Yeah. But I'll tell you, Tim, the insight into what happened with Daniel Ricciardo, and seeing, hearing you talk about how he was on the track today, or yesterday now, because it's 12:18 here. Hearing about how strong he was as a driver, when you see Christian say to him, and I remember you texted me this right around the time we were about to find out about Nick DeVries. You text messaged me something along the lines of his number, his time at Silverstone would have put him on the front row with Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
And I remember being shocked by that, not because I didn't think Daniel was a good driver, but because I didn't realize the amount of progress he'd made to get back to himself over that 6-month period. And seeing Christian say that to him, I mean, the Nick DeVries thing seemed unfair. It seemed at the time like, man, you just gave this guy no time to get started. That's how the team operates. But what was Christian Horner really going to do? You've got a guy who, if you put him in the Red Bull car on a one lap, can put himself next to Max Verstappen. What are you supposed to do? Let him sit? You kind of have to make that. It's like, this is Formula One. Is there a better driver? Then that's our guy, especially a guy that knows their system so well.
Yeah, 100%. I think, when you kind of look how that whole thing sort of played out and went down. I mean, I think for Ricciardo, having the time off was important to him, and he does make mention to that. And it was sort of recharging the batteries for him, because I did talk to him throughout that season last year. Like there were points where he and I actually sat down. Like I know we had Daniel on our podcast when we were in Mexico, but way before that, like I was sitting down with Daniel back in like Miami. So in May of that season, and he would look like a different guy just because he'd had some time away from everything. And they did a good job in kind of showing that, but they could have showed it a little bit more, because having that time removed from Formula One gives you different perspective when you come back, especially as an athlete, and especially as an athlete like Daniel Ricciardo. Like he was a different guy when I saw him at the end of 2022 and spoken to him. And then when I saw him again in the May of 2023, and then when I saw him again throughout that season, he was a different guy as that season sort of rolled along. You could just tell that he had been refreshed. He looked good, and he looked in good spirits. And that set him up nicely, I think, for this season that we're coming into now, 2024, to compete in and do well at, which he thinks he's going to. I didn't like the fact that they didn't show us much Nick DeVries. Like we were kind of promised like a bit of a Nick DeVries story, and we never really got that. And it's kind of like, okay, well, don't put something out there if you're not going to show it to us, because a lot of folks may not know. Like if you
we got him cleaning his apartment.
Yeah, that's it. Like if you go back to like 2022, like he's he's put into the Williams in Monza, and those two Williams cars, they weren't the same. Like, Nicholas Latifi and Nick DeVries didn't, have the same stuff. I mean, Alex was always getting the better equipment, and, Nick was put in the car at the right spot at the right moment and in the right set of circumstances. And you've got Christian Horner, down at Red Bull, and they see what he's doing, and they need another driver to fill in over at AlphaTauri, and they bring Nick over, and they don't really show all of what happened with him there. And that's got me curious as to, why not? Because that was a big story out in the middle of the season.
It absolutely was. Well, listen, Tim, I think, we can't give away too much about Drive to Survive, but it's a pretty spectacular season. The drama is amazing. And that's the great thing about Formula One is the drama is amazing, and it continued after the season was done. And, we're looking at Lewis Hamilton's last year with Mercedes. We're looking at, does Daniel Ricciardo come in and get to the Red Bull big team? There's so many things to talk about. I know you got to get to the track, so I'll let you get showered up and go, my friend. Enjoy. We'll be watching on social media. Very jealous of you. And enjoy the hot weather too. It's not bad in Toronto, but it's not Bahrain.
No, I mean, dude, actually, it's nice when you're in the sun here, but dude, once the sun goes down, I was in my jacket and pants, bro. It wasn't, Adam, it was kind of cold here last night. I'm not kidding. It was.
It is the desert. It's the way it goes. But listen, Tim, have an awesome time, buddy, and can't wait
Thanks,
to see
man.
what you come back with.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. This has been fun.